Firefighters, EMTs, cops and the like of Reddit, what are some of your most screwed up stories and or your most amusing? Possibly NSFW. Not my story but that of a friend of mine who is now an ER doctor. When he was a resident, he had two distinguished gentlemen come to the emergency room who both had padlocks on their scrotum. That is, the locks were attached above the balls so that the locks could not be removed. Apparently these guys were drinking and one thought it would be hilarious if he locked his balls. Without hesitation, the other guy agreed and did the same. Neither, of course, thought about whether they had the key to take the locks off before it was too late. Because they were on quite tight, there was a risk of cutting off circulation and staff needed to act quickly. When they discovered they didn't have the equipment to cut the locks safely, they actually had to get emergency locksmiths in to take them off. Many years ago, there was a particularly large woman who had been arrested and as she was being processed, they needed to search her. They began lifting up her fat rolls and underneath one of them was a grilled cheese sandwich. Yes, a sandwich. They had to scrap it out because of how long it had been under there. Can you top that story? I have many more. The worst one to me. Firefighter EMT. Run on a difficulty breathing call. Arrive and I find myself having a hard time breathing due to the smell of crap. I see the PT who seems to be high as balls. We stand her up and her pants are clearly full of it. We walk her to the ambulance and I begin to start an IV on her. I grab her arm to find a vein and as usual I place it in my lap. The paramedic shouts at me to wait, then throws a sheet in my lap. She had it all over her hands and arms that I hadn't spotted earlier. She had been playing in the it. Then I saw her smile. Please don't do meth. Otherwise, just about every combination of blood, piss, it, vomit and removed body parts you can imagine. Huge thanks to the fantastic individual who gave me gold. You are awesome. Husband is a police officer. Came home silent and eventually in tears. There was a call from dispatch saying a 5-year-old had called, saying her baby brother wasn't breathing. Ambulance came as well as police officers and CPS for possible child abuse. The scene was horrible. Only the mother was home and she was passed out surrounded by booze and was obviously a hoarder. Garbage and trash everywhere. Random it that was not child safe. Smelled like feces and decaying rodents. Child was found in her bedroom closet, smelled like piss and looked as if she hadn't been showered or fed in days. The infant, about 3 months, was barely breathing and was just wearing a severely soiled diaper. The closet was full of bottles of curdled milk. Turns out her sister had been trying her best to take care of him under the circumstances. Both children are alive and thriving today. Taken by CPS and were not separated. TLDR, it's not that long, just read if. Edit. Thanks everyone for the upvotes and letting me tell my story. Kind of sad that this comment about such horrors is my most upvoted comment ever. Anyways, stay safe and hug your families. Take care of them. Approaching a car in a drainage ditch. Window is cracked. You can already smell the booze. Young woman and driver's seat. Thin little thing. Reeks of Jack. Bloodied face from the airbag. She is muttering something over and over. Ma'am, I'm here to help. She continues looking forward and muttering. Ma'am, I'm here to help. Are you okay? Touch her lightly on the shoulder. She stops muttering. She turns to me and says the worst thing I have ever heard. Where is my baby? I notice the child seat and the passenger's seat for the first time. I notice why the window is broken, there is a hole. She didn't live long with every bone in her body crushed. Well, at least that is what I was told by the paramedics that actually found baby when they arrived. Girl was arrested. I was 16. I've graduated college. Done my fair share of drinking. People still wonder why I get angry and upset sometimes when I drink. It only happens when I smell Jack Daniels. I've posted this one before, but my most amusing story being a paramedicus. We got called out to a house in Fremont for a man having a seizure. We were right down the street, so we were first on scene within a minute. As we pull up, we see a little old lady nervously pointing to a man on her front lawn. The guy is disheveled looking, face down on the ground with his pants down around his ankles. He is moving up and down in a rhythmic fashion. It took a little bit of time, but after a few moments we figure out the man is making sweet love to a gopher hole in the lady's lawn. About that time Fremont PD showed up, grabbed the guy and threw him in the back of the squad car fully aroused. The little old lady was confused. I think she sort of knew what happened but didn't want to admit it. The gopher was not available for comment. I once responded to an emergency call on base. The elevator was broken, so I had to run up 8 flights of stairs and my bulletproof vest constricted my breathing a bit, so by the time I got to the door I was very out of breath. The call was a vague medical emergency where the RP was crying and kept saying they needed an ambulance. The dispatcher had called ahead and the barracks manager was waiting with a key. We opened the door to find a young seaman with his pants and underwear around his ankles, surrounded by pornography and lube. On the floor, he was just standing there on his tiptoes, tears running down his face and softly moaning. I walked over to him only to realize that the doorknob to his bathroom was up his ass and still attached to the door. Dumbfounded, I looked at him expectantly and he said I backed up into it by accident. Being already out of breath, I had to sit down as the laughter began. When EMS arrived they couldn't believe it either. They ended up cutting the door around the knob and transporting him with the knob still up his ass. As it was, they had to take him down 8 flights of stairs. With each bump down the steps the knob would move and he would yelp. By the 5th floor it wasn't funny anymore. More than me couch itches. My cousin is a cop. There was a call a few months ago in my town. A man got into a fight with his girlfriend who was in a hot tub. He went into the house, got her pet snake, Axe, 4 feet long, and started beating her with it like a whip and then threw it into the tub and it died. When my cousin showed up, the snake was still in the tub and the woman was covered in bruises. Bizarre. When I worked for a hospital where the criminal autopsies were performed, myself and another guy had to transfer an unidentified body from one body bag to a new one. The state had the person listed as an open case with no identity. His head and hands had been removed. That is why he was in our morgue for over 3 years. Even in a chilled environment tissues decompose, just slower. So the reason we had to transfer him was because he was leaking. We proceeded to pour the liquefied contents from bag A to bag B, then scup out the bones and hair and other slop, as all of it was still part of an open investigation. TLDR. Repackaged man soup in a morgue. Not my story, but a co-worker of mine who now works at another department. He was dispatched to a call for a man high on PCP at his mother's house and his family was worried about him. When he arrived, he said it was the bloodiest scene he has ever seen. There was blood all over the floor, on the walls, and on the ceiling. When he walked all the way into the room, he saw a naked man sitting on the floor flossing his teeth. Apparently the guy was high on PCP and was flossing his teeth with piano wire. It ended up destroying the guy's teeth and gums. I once had a call where 2 cops had obviously beaten the guy very badly. I had to clean up copious amounts of his blood from the street. Illegal. And then we did a code 1 return. No lights and sirens. Even though he was in and out of consciousness and our medical control stated, obviously, that all head trauma with loss of consciousness is a code 3. Lights and sirens. Return. We did this because my crew chief wanted to cover up for the cops. It made me sick. It was the last straw and I quit shortly after. A friend of mine is EMT. Here is a good story. So my friend and his EMT partner get a call that a woman just had her water break while having sex with her boyfriend. They rush over to find this fat young woman freaking out, complaining she has liquid oozing from her V and that she believes she broke her water. My buddy calms her down, puts on his gloves, and does a quick examination of her nether regions. After a moment down there he says, "Ma'am," holds up finger, "this is semen. Your water isn't broken. How long have you been pregnant?" She was a large woman. "Tough to tell," she replied. "No, I'm not pregnant, but I thought he broke my water." After a quick explanation of human anatomy they left. Got called out to a private residence for a morbidly obese woman complaining of chest pain. Imagine a June Shannon, Honey Boo Boo type character, sat in a well-worn velour chair just living the dream. Anyway, what she was describing didn't seem like it was of cardiac etiology, but I decided to do a 12-lead, an ECG test that looks at your heart's electrical activity. Regardless, for this test you have to place the chest leads in specific locations, and as I was doing this I found the source of her chest pain. I pushed her floppy breast out of the way and I found an Oreo ducking cookie lodged in between her fat rolls. Who knows how long it had been there, festering. but let's just say it had begun to take on the appearance of the people in the alien movies that got encased in that xenomorphic chrysalis stuff. There it is. I said it. I revisited this memory and I better get some ducking karma for it. 60-year-old lady saying her feet felt like Rice Krispies dart shoes came off, maggots and rotted feet. Had a friend's dad who was an EMT. He got a call one night to head to the train station for a stomach wound. Upon arrival he noticed a man running around swinging what looked to be a whip all around the station as people ran from him. Closer inspection revealed this was the man's own intestines he had cut from his belly. Cops cannot reason with him, so they decide to taser him in the chest. All that did was make him angry, so he started beating the taser lines with his own bowels until he was tackled. I work in the emergency department. The recent case we had was a 67-year-old lady who came in because she somehow got a bottle cap stuck in her V. She told us she had been drinking all day for the football game. We just assumed she was showing off a party trick. Another case that I remember vividly was a morbidly obese woman who came in by EMS because she broke her ankle. It was an open fracture and her foot was entirely backwards. She stated that she broke her ankle by turning around wrong in her bathroom. Oh, we always get the gunshot wounds and stab wounds too. We had a gang member come into the ED with 3 bullet wounds to the chest. The rival gang showed up to the hospital in order to finish the job. So the patient's gang and the rival gang had a gunfight outside the hospital, which was subsequently put in lockdown. Met a police officer in Nick who actually worked in my home city and he told me this. When he was a rookie he got called out for a stinker. A neighbor had called in a horrible smell and hadn't seen their neighbor in several days. They contacted the neighbor's employer and the guy hadn't shown up in a few days. You get the idea. The rookie goes to the house, knocks on the door, windows, etc. Smells the smell and decides to go in. He enters slowly calling out the guy's name. Horrible smell. He looks down the back hallway and can see a door open down the hall and can see a TV is on and playing static and some kind of mechanical motor sound. There is also a video camera facing one of the walls of the bedroom. He slowly enters the room and no one is on the bed, so he turns the corner a bit and looks into the open closet. There is a dead guy hanging by a bit of rope gyrating sickeningly. The guy had put a mechanical dildo in his bum and it was on a rotating motor, but the guy's weight after he accidentally choked himself too much and died had deformed the shaft so it was off center, causing him to gyrate. The TV was displaying static because the tape in the VCR had run out. It turns out the guy had been watching recordings of himself jerking it while choking himself in the closet with a mechanical dildo. The camera was set up to record him doing it this time. SPCAR officer. Cat hoarder house was found. Noticed Nazi posters and signs on the wall. Also noticed all of the cats had been hair dyed to have Hitler mustaches. My dad has been a lieutenant firefighter for the past 23 years and he always says that he can handle almost any medical call except for when it involves kids. One day he got a medical about an injured kid at the local elementary school and rushed over to take care of him. In transit they find out that their kid had been hit in the throat by a football while trying to block a punt at recess and he had stopped breathing. My dad's station was the first to arrive on the scene. And being the most experienced EMT in his crew, he was first to perform CPR and place IVs the kid. Unfortunately it wasn't enough and the kid passed in my father's arms. It's something that he has lived with and tried to forget for 2 years now. So far in all his years of service and seeing the plethora of mutilated bodies that he's seen, that was the only day that he had to come home and take the rest of the day off. Fortunately the fire department did provide counseling which he took advantage of and is much better today, but it is something that will always be there. I work for social services. The most screwed up case I've had to deal with, thus far, is when an infant was literally and repeatedly held by the legs and swung up against a wall like a baseball bat. The child is alive but suffered brain damage. The child is about a year old and so far the back of the head is caved in, can't talk, and the whole right side of the child's body is paralyzed. Dumbest criminal I ever met. I'm in Leo for a small department. There are 15 police officers in our town. Well, enter James. James is a young kid, maybe 19. Fast as it. Slings weed and heroin. We know James. He knows us. It's comical when he gets arrested because he is friendly and actually funny. The issue is, James can run very fast. He is smart enough to have an escape plan when he goes and sells. One day, a warrant comes down for James for a failure to appear at court. So I go to his usual hangouts, ask around. Someone says he is at the baseball field in town, which is located near Woods etc. So fast as James can easily get away if he chose to. Well, I had to try. So when I get there are the normal amount of people at a field. Some playing football, some hanging out at the park. While I spot James, I start walking fast to him. The adrenaline get going, because I know he is going to run. Maybe halfway there he turns and sees me. James runs. James is very fast, and is in full flight. I get into some tall grass, and he's just getting distance on me. So for the hell of it, out of nowhere, I started to bark like a dog. Ruff 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 James. The dog lay down now. James, scared shitless, dives on the ground with hands on his head. I get to him, cuff him and search him. Found some weeds. As I'm walking back to the car, he asked, "Where's the dog?" Me, James. "We haven't had a canine here in 20 years. James, AWW, that's ducked up. Since then when I see him, I always let him know I got the dog in the car." Had a friend who was called out to this psychotic guy who saw the snake, got a knife and chopped it to pieces. Turned out it was his D. The psychotic guy was apparently living proof black guys are big ones, or had in his case. Flagpole fell and crushed a 4-year-old, splitting her head wide open. Worst was her mother screaming. I was on a junior firefighter program when I was 15 in my small town. I'm talking really small town, like 400 people. One night a guy was heading home drunk in his pickup truck, flipped the truck, wasn't wearing his seatbelt. While the truck was in the air he managed to hang halfway out his side window. The truck landed on its side and slid for about 100 feet. So there was body and car part everywhere. Being a small town in the middle of BFE, there is no cleanup crew. Who do they call to clean up? The fire department. I'm walking around at night with a flashlight, rubber gloves, and a bag, picking up pieces of this drunk guy. Edit. It's not like they forced me at gunpoint. The fire department was all volunteer and I said I would help. It's a dead body, not like I had never seen one. Not my story, but a friend's. He got a call to a house with an old man that said he was constipated and was on the toilet for 2 days. He had a huge piece of it prairie dogging out his ass and he was in serious pain. He said they didn't have a chance to get him off the toilet into the hospital, so they were forced to do something at that moment. They found one of those huge metal spoons and starting scraping and breaking apart his bono-sized ear while the man spread his cheeks. If I remember correctly, the guy was okay and finally made it to the hospital and went through a couple serious surgeries. My brother was an EMT for a while and told me a good one. His ambulance was called to pick a guy up from a halfway house to take the hospital because he was going crazy. When they arrive, turns out the cops were already there and told them to call an ambulance because the crazy guy was so big. They didn't want to deal with him. My brother is pretty big, but his partner that night was a 5-foot girl, so he basically decided he was on his own. He gets an elevator to go up to the floor where this guy is in the hallway and has been yelling at anyone who tries to take him in. When the elevator door opens, this huge guy is standing right at the door glaring at my brother. My brother stares, not stares, not glares, back for a moment, then breaks the silence. "Dude, you are big as hell." The guy's glare softens. Then he starts laughing. My brother says, "Look man, everyone's just a bit worried about you. Would you mind just coming with me and we'll just get you checked out at the hospital for the night?" The guy stops laughing and says, "Yeah, alright." He gets in the elevator with my brother, voluntarily gets on the stretcher waiting outside, and goes to the hospital without incident. TLDR, sometimes the right words can be better than force. Not my personal EMT story, but some of my fellow volunteers responded to a call where the patient had a golf ball stuck in his butt. He said, "I'm not gay, I just wanted to try it." This is from my mother, who worked in the ER during her residency. She said one of the worst cases she ever saw was a woman who had been beaten by her boyfriend. They had to bring her in on a stretcher. All the bones in her face had been broken. And my mother said she remembered this woman's eyeballs just oozing down her face, like jelly. She went blind, of course, and apparently later had reconstructive surgery, but was never the same. Maternity call, middle of the night, bad part of the city, minimal information on the run as usual. We show up expecting to perform a field delivery. Me and my partner were baby delivering machines that summer. We get in the house and find that mom's fine, but our patient is already deceased as it had been miscarried into the toilet the previous evening. Mom had been high on crack. She was tearfully admitting all this to us and the 5 firefighters and the 2 cops who were also present, and unaware she was even pregnant. She was a big girl, so she panicked, fished the fetus out, put it in a Ziploc bag and put it in the kitchen trash. She found it that evening after waking up from a long and well-deserved slumber and deciding to cook some food. Realizing what she'd done, she freaked out and called 911 only because she was worried that if she threw it in the trash someone might have found it and she could have gone to jail. She was incredibly hysteric at that point and started having chest pains. We took her to the hospital as a precaution, also because of the spontaneous abortion, but she refused to be in the back of the ambulance with the bagged fetus. So my partner drove to us there with it laying on the passenger seat up front. He put the seatbelt over it because he was worried it might slide off onto the floor. My first call as an EMT was an elderly woman who fell down her stairs and cracked her head open. Blood and brain matter were oozing out of her ears. My job was to bag her, give her oxygen with the bag valve mask. We met up with the air medics and they flew her to a trauma center. I think she ended up passing away at the hospital. I just remember the look her husband had on his face the whole time. Till, morbidly obese people haunt the nightmares of every EMT dispatch. My roommate was an EMT and told me a story about a Halloween where a guy was so drunk he fell off a 2-story spiral staircase, crashed through a glass table, and got up and walked to the bar covered in blood and glass to order another drink before the EMTs came. 50-something biker got sideswiped by a car on the road and severed his leg mid-femur. When he finally dropped, the exposed bone dragged through the dirt on the side of the road. When we brought him in, he had clumps of grass and earth sticking out of his bone. I was working as CNA in an emergency hospital when a woman comes in nearly dead and running 104-degree fever. They begin questioning her husband. They finally got it out of him that they had been using ranch dressing as a sexual lubricant for 3 months. It turns out to be toxic shock from a massive uterine infection. I refuse to eat ranch dressing to this day. This is by far the worst one I have heard personally. I was in EMT school back in college and you are required X amount of hours in hospital work and X amount of time on a rig. A girl in my class who was barely out of high school was fortunate to assigned to a rig with SDFD, which everyone knew received the best calls. So I guess towards the last half of their shift they receive a call about an animal attack and involving an infant. They take the call and when they get to the scene everyone their lives were changed. Supposedly the parents were so cracked out they fed their 11-month-old infant child to their 3 rabid dogs out back. There was barely any recognizable features of what was left of this child. I get choked up just thinking about how there are people out there like this. So anyways, the poor kid is off at chapel, sort of like a counselor, along with the other team working the call. But what I thought was horrible was this girl who I am sure is forever scarred, won't get paid leave, or extended counseling. I mean you kinda of sign up for this in the beginning. Our teacher said everyone has a cup of coffee, and every day you work it just fills that much more. This girl's cup filled and did not stop when it reached full. I went on a couple dates with an attractive EMT. She had a few stories about drunk or drugged out people hitting on her as she was trying to help them. Like one time she showed up to a swingers party when an older drunk lady broke her leg getting out of the hot tub. This one was one of my favorites though. They picked up this guy who was super twisted on drugs. He took off in his car when a cop tried to pull him over. The guy wrecked his car and took off on foot, at which point the cops hit him with their car. So the guy's in the back of the ambulance with the hot EMT and a cop turns to the girl and says, "Hey, you're pretty hot. What are you doing tomorrow night?" EMT, "Sir, you're in serious condition. You're going to be in the hospital tomorrow night." Drugged out guy, "Well, what if I'm not in the hospital?" EMT, "Then you're definitely going to be in jail."